call from the formal architecture and design and engineering world, as well as landscape design, and many folks in the public sector as well at Public Works. Before joining the 2030 commitment team here, I worked in Public Works for the DC government. So you guys are, I definitely miss speaking with those in the public works space, but I'm really excited to be here with you all today and to have such a robust group from both the state as well as the city level components and chapters here in your region. So with that, we'll get started. And as we start here, we'll talk about just a couple of logistical items as we jump in. As many of you guys might be aware, this conversation today qualifies for one learning unit for health, safety, and welfare. We'll go ahead and report that credit to you all within 10 business days. It should be registered in your account. You would have had the opportunity to drop in your AIA member number when you registered for this session, but if for whatever reason you didn't have that handy or forgot to put it in, just shoot us a note at 2030commitment@aia.org and we'll get you squared away. But eager for everyone to participate on this call today, and very much hope that it's a call and conversation, not just unilateral me chatting about the 2030 commitment with you all. So please don't hesitate to drop any questions, comments in the chat as we go, to unmute yourselves and jump back in. We are really eager for all of your thoughts and questions and comments and concerns, and you name it, we are really eager to have a conversation about it as it relates to the 2030 commitment and how we can all accelerate progress towards carbon neutral buildings, which is the macro level topic we're here to talk about today, of course, and a few of kind of the specific components of the conversation we hope to foster are here on the right-hand side. So not only talking about how carbon neutral buildings are so important to the conversation about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions as a whole, but also how you all as architects and building professionals are uniquely poised to drive change in that department and really implement those sustainable design strategies from the ground. We'll also look at key actions that architects can take to transform their own practice in their firm and drive carbon neutral buildings through cultures of innovation in their firm, and some different ways that 2030 commitment signatories are doing that today. And we'll also look at the most important metrics that you'll want to be tracking and that we help you track as part of the 2030 commitment to reduce your energy use across your portfolio. Does anyone have any initial questions that they want to make sure we answer, that you guys would be upset if in an hour we were signing off and we didn't cover? I'd love to ask that as we get started, just to make sure we make sure to check those boxes.
So this is Kent Lefevre. The first question I have, and maybe the biggest question on everybody's mind, is how much does it cost? How much does carbon neutral cost? First costs in a building. Thank you.
Thanks, Kent. A great question too, and I hope we should be able to cover a good number of facets of that today. Any additional questions that are top of mind? Thanks for that one. Okay, don't feel like this is your only opportunity. We'll stop it at numerous points, but I really appreciate that, Kent, to start us off. And I think you're absolutely right. That cost piece is an important one, and one that is on everyone's minds, whether we like it or not. So with that, let's get started talking about the role of the built environment in a changing climate.
Share that really quickly.
Yes.
If you're sharing your screen, your slide, I can't see it, but that may be on my end.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. I didn't realize I had clicked anything. Let me give that a second go. Thanks, Matt. How's this now?
Looks good, thanks.
Thanks so much. Please shout if that, for whatever reason, if I butcher it again, much appreciated. All right, take two. We'll now talk about how the built environment impacts the changing climate that we're all in today. And that is displayed a little bit here on the right-hand side. This graph, I'm curious if folks are familiar with. Feel free to drop in the chat if you've happened to seen this on, in headlines or in news articles over the past few months. Folks are likely familiar with the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is a surprisingly clunky acronym for a really simple concept, a big group of scientists that exist around the world, thousands of scientists that come together to vet scientific data and research and quantify the risk to climate and the impact of climate change, and assessing the different opportunities that we have to mitigate climate change. And folks if you're not familiar with the IPCC itself, you're likely familiar with the concept of needing to keep global temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius. I feel like that's a somewhat common refrain we hear in common parlance over the dinner table and on the news. And a few years ago, this group of scientists announced that, you know, this is really only going to be achievable if we have kind of quote unquote rapid improvements to the way we're doing things today in order to reach net zero by 2050. Unfortunately, about 7 months ago now, the IPCC announced that based on the progress we had made in the most recent few years, it's looking like it unfortunately might be too late for us to keep it within that threshold, that safe zone of 1.5 degrees that we feel we need to in order to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. Not all of them, of course. We know that many are already occurring to date. But on the right-hand side here, you can see a few of the projections that the IPCC made. In intermediate, in that middle orange band, you can see the projections for how the temperature change will increase over the next century if we have this kind of intermediate status situation continuing. We won't stay within the 1.5 degree threshold. That safe zone will probably double that and almost have 3 degrees of warming. If we are able to rally and really drive down energy use and carbon into a low or a very low scenario, we might be able to stay very close to or just under that 1.5 degree threshold. And unfortunately, if we really let things escalate and exponentially increase, we'll likely be dealing with a high or very high scenario where we have 4 or 5 degrees temperature increase, significantly more than 3 times as much as scientists think will be safe for us to continue. And we know, of course, that many of you all working in Las Vegas or in the immediate vicinity know this better than most, with it being, I think, usually neck and neck right up there in the top couple of cities that are experiencing the most rapid increase of temperature change in the change in climate, in addition to stresses like water use and drought. Here, looking at the portion of that macro level global scale of carbon emissions by sector. How does the building industry and construction industry contribute to that overall picture? On the right-hand side, you can see here in the 2 portions highlighted in green, the 2 pieces of the puzzle that make up that equation. So as a whole, the building sector contributes about 40% of global carbon emissions. And about 30% of them, about 3/4, 75% of the total for the building sector comes from building operations and operational energy and energy use intensity for buildings. So because it's the biggest piece of the puzzle, if you will, that's what the 2030 commitment focuses on for the most part. In a lot of places, of course, building operations make up an even more substantial piece than 30% of all carbon emissions. In some cities like Boston, for instance, carbon emissions are more than 70% attributable to building operations, which is really incredible when you stop to think about it, that it's not only the biggest piece, but the biggest piece by that enormous of an amount. Of course, we care about building operational energy, and it's the biggest piece today relative to that building materials and construction piece, that embodied carbon piece. But that's also really important too, and keeping track of and working to decrease the embodied carbon that is in building material in a building once constructed is also a really important piece of the puzzle. And with that in mind, we're constantly looking to expand embodied carbon as a part of the 2030 commitment, and give opportunities for signatories to better track embodied carbon data. So there are optional fields that you can elect to report embodied carbon data in the DDX, along with your operational energy, which is the real required core pieces of it. More shortly. It's incredibly important to understand too, not only does the building sector contribute a really large portion of global climate emissions today, but that's expected to increase precipitously. In the next 40 years, we'll add 2.5 trillion square feet of building stock globally. doubling the amount that we have today, which is an astounding pace of growth, and one that really highlights just how importantly be building in as sustainable manner as possible, with operational energy really well poised to be as low as possible. This incredible rate of growth really underscores that it's imperative for us to be doing things differently. We can't keep building buildings the way we have for decades and centuries past. The 2030 commitment for the industry, and how can the 2030 commitment be a tool for us to better understand our data and our operational energy that we currently have in the buildings we're designing today, and also measure our progress as we move forwards, working to achieve carbon neutrality in our buildings. Well, one of the important ways we can think about this is reflecting back on recent progress that the architecture profession has had in improving the energy profiles of buildings and the performance of buildings that are being designed. And importantly, since 2005, around the time that the IPCC started crunching more of those climate numbers, the US has added more than 50 billion square feet of building stock. And if we were doing things the way we had been, we would be expecting the building sector emissions to increase in pace with that. But architects have been doing a phenomenal job of reducing energy and driving down energy use intensity in their buildings, so much so that we've been able to reduce building sector emissions by 30% over the same period. So 30% is a really good down payment. We're not at carbon neutral buildings today by any means industry-wide, but this impressive progress so far really demonstrates how far the industry has come from the status quo that was being designed to for a long time, and that there's really great momentum behind us, and lots of firms and architects that are working towards these goals together presently. The 2030 commitment in particular supports the 2030 challenge to transform the practice of architecture in a way that's holistic, firm-wide, project-based, and data-driven. That's really the approach that the 2030 commitment takes to supporting architecture firms and practicing architects to be designing buildings that are approaching and reaching carbon neutrality. So those four elements are something that you'll hear as a refrain throughout the conversation today. Is an approach that's holistic, portfolio-wide, but project-based, and really focused on the data for each, and enabling you to assess what that looks like. What are the targets specifically? Well, in 2006, the independent nonprofit Architecture 2030 developed these targets that you can see here increasing on the right-hand side. When the program was launched in 2010, there was a target of 60% reduction of predicted energy use intensity. Predicted energy use intensity is the key main metric that we examine as part of the 2030 commitment to track our progress in designing more efficient and high-performing buildings. So when the program launched, it had a 60% target of reduction. By 2015, that moved up to 70%. We have a target of 80%, and this is all with the hopes of working us down to have a reduction of 80% of predicted energy use intensity, and then meeting that remaining 20% with renewable energy, whether on-site or off-site. So you can see here on the green stacked bars, the big dark green chunk is the amount of reduction of energy use intensity that we're hoping to foster through design strategies, through improved building enclosure, performance, and then the lighter green piece, what we're hoping to foster with renewable energy to ensure that our buildings that are being designed moving forwards are removing fossil fuels to the greatest extent possible. It's really exciting that a number of firms are already meeting carbon neutrality and these 2030 targets in their portfolio today. Not only individual projects, but many firms are meeting the 80% energy reduction targets that we have today across their entire portfolio. 15 firms were able to do that, but it demonstrates that that's really still a minority of the firms that are designing buildings out there, and the great opportunity for us to be working together towards that goal. And as we're talking about the targets, I think a lot of feedback that we have from folks that are thinking about joining the 2030 commitment and considering becoming signatories is some concern that, today you're not designing buildings that are necessarily all reducing predicted energy use intensity by 80% or all, shooting for carbon neutrality. You may not have clients that are asking for that necessarily, but what we really aim to highlight and what we're eager to talk through we'd like to help facilitate moving in that direction from wherever you are today, whether it's the occasional client you have that's interested in a high performing building, or if you don't have a whole swath of clients in your portfolio today that are asking for that necessarily. The 2030 commitment is really intended to be a framework and structure for you to start integrating these considerations and decisions to your portfolio, and from wherever you're starting, moving in this direction. So very much want to underscore that perfection should not be the enemy of progress, and that the work you do to increase the performance of your buildings across the portfolio is what the 2030 commitment is all about. How have the 2030 commitment signatories been progressing over time today? As we looked at on a slide or two ago, the program launched in 2010, and at that time, firms that had become 2030 commitment signatories had buildings that were able to employ those tactics, like using reusable energy on-site or off-site, using building orientation and thoughtful enclosure, envelope, window to wall ratio, lighting and glazing strategies to reduce predicted energy use intensity by about a third, a little over a third relative to conventional buildings. And that's been progressing over the course of the past decade, where 2030 commitment firm signatories today projects that have about half the predicted energy use intensity of your conventional building that's just being designed to code, which is really exciting progress towards the target that we have of 80% today, and towards our overall target, of course, of carbon neutral buildings by 2030. I'd love to pause here before we talk about how some specific firms are using the 2030 commitment and leveraging the 2030 commitment to talk about the last handful of topics. Does anyone have any questions about the targets right now, about the progress of 2030 commitment signatories, about the broader level topic of the built environment and climate change? I'll pause here in case there is anyone that has any burning questions. That's okay if not, we can continue on. We'll continue on. All right, so what does the 2030 commitment mean for your firm? A lot of firms participate in the 2030 commitment signatory with lots of different goals in mind. There are almost 1,000. We are just about at the precipice of 1,000 firms who have signed on to the 2030 commitment, of all shapes and sizes, from every corner of the country, both small, large firms, those that focus on specific building use types, those that encompass many, many use types. It's really a mixed bag, and that incredible diversity, I think, really strengthens the 2030 commitment and has pulled in so much valuable data to help firms like you all understand how you're doing relative to the industry at large. And it's a really exciting diversity. But we'll go ahead and watch a short video now about a medium-sized firm in Virginia called VMDO, and how they've integrated the 2030 commitment into their operations and used it to help streamline performance across their portfolio.
In terms of climate action, I think that architects have both a tremendous responsibility and a tremendous opportunity. A lot of the decisions that we make or we coordinate directly affect how our built environment performs, and thus the future of the planet. But we also have the skill sets to come up with the solutions, and that's a powerful combination. The 2030 commitment asks firms to commit to reporting the energy use of their portfolio every year, and to reduce the energy use by 80% now towards 100% reduction by 2030. The minute you start measuring something, that's when it matters. That's when you care about it. Up until then, it's just yada, yada, yada. Signing on to the commitment helps you motivate teams. It helps you figure out where you need to improve. It makes your work better. We have a number of, we refer to them as zero energy projects. The Lubber Run Community Center is one. We have a number of K-12 schools. Discovery Elementary is probably the most famous one. Opened about 5.5, 6 years ago. Has been zero energy since it opened. To make the commitment is not hard, and it's going to be about the real tools it gives you to change how you practice. Not enough firms are signed up. There are only 30 firms in Virginia signed up right now. It doesn't work if it's just a couple of us doing it. For us, while having 2030 out there is important, once 2030 passes, it's not like we're done. It'll continue on. Even with the challenges that we have ahead of us, through deliberate design, we can design a better world.
not only am I a fan of what Michelle there with VMDO has to say, because they're based in Charlottesville, Virginia, which I used to call home, but I think they so elegantly put a lot of the really important, helpful benefits of the 2030 commitment into perspective, that it's a helpful structure and framework to use to drive sustainability and high performance throughout your portfolio. Whether you're a sophisticated big firm with lots of dedicated sustainability professionals on staff to drive this, or whether you're a small firm, maybe it's just you yourself who really have to wear many, many hats and figure out how to make this work into your already very busy days. There are a number of things that Michelle touched on there in talking about how VMDO has used the 2030 commitment and how it's been helpful to them. One way has been to demonstrate their climate leadership and really use the 2030 commitment as a tool to demonstrate to their clients, to their peers, to their competitors that this is a priority for them. Another way that is helpful for many firms in joining the 2030 commitment is using the free online tool that we provide to aggregate and track energy performance data called the DDX, which we'll take a look at some snapshots of in just a moment. If you don't have a complex, sophisticated system right now to manage your energy performance data, this is what a lot of firms decide to use exclusively to house the predicted energy use intensity reduction that they anticipate for buildings, to iteratively input data as they do energy modeling or as they have design elements that change, like window to wall ratio in a given project, and to also compare from project to project not only how that building is doing compared to the ones that you've built, but also towards the aggregated anonymized data of the industry and all the signatories of the 2030 commitment that are reporting data in today. In addition, it's also helpful to be part of the 2030 commitment to have access to some really excellent resources. We'll touch on a few of them later, but everything from the AIA's primer on renewable energy, which is a spectacular resource to think through whether you can integrate renewables on site or whether your site is not a good fit for that and you might have to use offsite renewables, how to think about preparing your building for that. Or some of our online course series that go into depths talking about the mechanics of how to orient your building, how to design overhangs to best make use of the light you have. Of course, you all are in a sunny part of the country and are probably best poised to make use of a lot of these strategies to begin with. But being a member, a signatory of the 2030 commitment gives you discounts on those. It's also a really helpful tool in the spirit of demonstrating your climate leadership. It's a helpful tool to both attract clients and talent. This is something that is really important to young professionals in particular, and is something that really engenders a lot of loyalty and allows you to demonstrate your values as a firm. It's also a really big, diverse community of firms and professionals. As we talked about a few minutes ago, the 2030 commitment has about about 1,000 signatories across the architecture, engineering, and construction community. Sorry, one second. Man, I always hate that when it's like just when you're coming over the line there. But it's an incredible community of peers that are really excited to share best practices and learnings with you. They are not protective over strategies. They are not proprietary over what's worked well for them. It's been really overwhelming to come in and join AIA National a few months ago and have firms that work on the 2030 commitment be overwhelmingly interested in sharing their learnings with others and helping others replicate their success. Excuse me. In addition, it's been a really great opportunity for those who are interested in applying for design awards, and it enables you, to have energy performance data at your fingertips, with the DDX enabling you to aggregate, energy performance data. You're well poised to submit submissions to award design programs, having that all in one place, being tracked in a unified way already. But one of the biggest reasons why the 2030 commitment is helpful and a real benefit to firms large or small is to use it as a framework to drive that culture of innovation and change and enable this to be a way you can really build muscle memory around incorporating sustainability decision-making and into all of your projects, regardless of whether it's one that a client is specifically asking for or not. Excuse me here while I'm coming back with my voice. Here is a really great quote from an architect named Matt Arabaz, who is with a firm called Airbnb Architects in Fort Collins, Colorado. They focus on K-12 facilities and use this as a really helpful opportunity. And Kent, I think this gets a little bit at your question. about the financial side and the cost side, about how a high-performing school can be communicated to a client. So not only are they able to articulate the predicted energy use intensity reduction in the DDX and as a 2030 commitment signatory, but they're able to then translate that into the operational energy reduction and the dollars that saves a client at the end of the day. For a given school district, that might look like hundreds of thousands of dollars, which can be translated into other important uses. One of the really helpful things that's communicated in many of our resources, and I know, Ken, your question was particularly about that upfront cost, not necessarily the operational savings that occur over years to come after a building is commissioned and in practice. But one of the best parts about the case studies, in my opinion, in many of our guides that we have in many of our resources and online webinars and courses, are lots of anecdotes and important learnings about those first costs and how they've been able to be optimized. One of the important learnings and common themes across 2030 commitment signatories that are doing really great jobs of achieving the energy use intensity reduction targets that we have today are designing this from the outset and energy modeling from the outset and doing that early. And that enables them to be well poised to make these decisions and have it be built in and not bolted on. When pausing to consider energy use intensity reduction and strategies to integrate operations in a more streamlined manner farther down in the design process, you aren't able to often glean as many of those upfront cost reductions and savings, whether it's right sizing your HVAC system or what have you. There's lots of really great examples of that I think is one of the most helpful things about the 2030 commitments, elevation of those peer-to-peer learnings. Here is a brief breakdown of some of the initial steps that, should you choose to join the 2030 commitment as a signatory, you'll be thinking through in the near future. So whether, if you choose to join, you'll want to sign a commitment letter to the 2030 signatory. As a 2030 signatory, this is something that one of your firm leadership will likely sign. So a firm joins the 2030 commitment as a whole. An individual within a firm wouldn't be the entity joining, unless, of course, you're a firm of one or two folks. You'll want someone in leadership to be demonstrating the firm's commitment to the 2030 commitment. When you're in your first year, you'll be mainly starting to integrate strategies that will be working towards the 2030 targets, as well as creating a sustainability action plan to express how your firm is going to go about doing that and reaching the 2030 commitment targets of 80% today, and of course, carbon neutrality by 2030. And we'll talk a bit more about sustainability action plans and what that looks like in just a moment. Starting at year one, you'll then start reporting your projects in the DDX in that online platform, that tool that we offer to enable energy data to be tracked and reported. And then iteratively, as you move forwards, you'll review and update your sustainability action plan should you join to reflect the changing work you're doing, what's working well, what's not working well. Most folks choose to do that about every 3 years. But the sustainability action plan in particular is really an incredibly helpful tool, one that really works to drive that culture of innovation in your firm. We recently launched a sustainability action plan guide, creating a sustainability action plan that works here, that just a few pages are snapshotted here on the right-hand side, which is a really invaluable tool to sit down with, and highly recommend that everyone check out. It's accessible on aia.org if you drop this into Google, or Matt, if you perhaps wouldn't mind dropping the link. Thank you. And it's a really robust guide that includes worksheets, how-tos on facilitating conversations with your peers and staff, about how to baseline feelings about sustainability in your firm today, baseline attitudes of your peers, how you're going to track and report data. Are you going to start with your biggest projects the first year you report data, or one business unit? Maybe you'll start with the K-12 facilities 1 year and then turn to pivot to the remainder of your buildings in year 2. There's a lot of ways that firms decide to start reporting their energy data after year 1, and you'll want to be thinking through that as part of the process when designing your sustainability action plan. You'll also be wanting to think through details like whether you're going to stick to that core metric of predicted energy use intensity, or whether you might want to pursue the more robust suite of data that we enable you to track and report as a 2030 commitment signatory, like embodied carbon. You can also input renewable energy use sources. We'll go over some of the details there shortly, but you'll want to think through that entire process of what you'd like to focus on and how you'd like to approach it is part of your sustainability action plan. And it looks different for every firm. A lot of firms already have robust ESG reports or CSR reports where they're articulating how they're integrating sustainability into their portfolio. which is great. You know, you can use that, you can expand on that as a sustainability action plan here for your purpose as a 2030 commitment signatory. This is an opportunity for other firms who have yet to put pen to paper and draft an approach for their firm about sustainability to do so. So for some firms, it's concise and 6 pages. For other firms, it's 100 pages and incredibly robust. It's really what would be most helpful and important to you. That's what your sustainability action plan needs to be. So as we looked at a couple of the high level things that you'll get started with in your first year if you join the 2030 commitment, I'll read through now just a few additional ways that you'll be able to start becoming an active member of the 2030 commitment community should you choose to join. One will create an account in the DDX and upload that commitment letter we discussed. That's something that one can go in tonight and do to create an account in the DDX and look around and then work with your leadership to sign and upload that 2030 commitment letter. You'll also then want to talk about the news with your firm and share that your firm has committed to the 2030 targets and are going to be integrating sustainability in a more meaningful way, and predicted energy use reduction is throughout your portfolio. You may want to join your local 2030 roundtable or committee on the environment if you're not already plugged into those, and we know that you all benefit from really robust community around these topics here in your region. You'll want to think about who should be responsible for this work within your firm, whether a designated sustainability professional, if that's a logical fit under their current purview, or whether it's something that should be integrated throughout the portfolio of members, of peers. And you can also begin to add the 2030 commitment signatory into marketing materials, demonstrating that climate leadership that's beneficial for a lot of signatories to really signal to their community that they're pursuing energy targets. You can also join our online peer-to-peer network, which is a thriving community of many professionals at those almost 1,000 firms who are sharing best practices about what's working well. We share news about changes to the DDX, to the online platform, new fields that you'll be able to start reporting and tracking data in, a number of really exciting developments. You can also then dive into some of the mechanics through those online courses we discussed, like AIA Plus 2030, which is our really core opportunity to understand how to drive energy reduction and increase energy performance throughout your portfolio, regardless if it's residential, commercial, you name it, in lots of different climate zones, not only 3B, of course, that you all are in your neck of the woods. And in the course of your first year, of course, putting pen to paper and really starting to flesh out that sustainability action plan. In addition, you'll want to start implementing what's being articulated there and fleshed out, whether you do that on your biggest projects first or just within a particular business unit. Depends. Some folks decide they're just going to go all in and start to implement those policies and procedures that are part of your sustainability action plan throughout their entire portfolio, which is also great. There's lots of opportunities to acquaint yourself with the DDX, with that online reporting tool we'll take a look at in just a minute as well. And to start adding information about your active and completed projects. So you're able to begin tracking that data, and come year one, start reporting it through the platform. After year one, of course, we'll be wanting to really lean in and start working towards meeting those energy targets. The DDX also provides really important, helpful analytics for you to analyze the performance relative to your own portfolio, as well as comparable projects in your region and with your use types elsewhere. So you can see whether you're about average in the middle of the pack, whether you're far exceeding your peers in designing an office building or a courthouse or a K-12 facility, you name it, or whether you're a bit behind. And of course, reviewing and updating your sustainability action plan. But I'll keep going on here, knowing we're a good way through of our time here today. A couple really great examples of how some firms who are 2030 commitment signatories have leaned in beyond just the sustainability action plan and really gone to integrate the 2030 commitment as a framework and structure to drive change throughout their firm are DLR Group on the left-hand side here and Payette here on the right. On the left, DLR Group here has an incredibly big, massive scoreboard in their office here in Phoenix, where they demonstrate each project's progress towards the 2030 commitment targets, which is a really excellent way to elevate that and make that transparent and have that be top of mind for folks, regardless of their job function or their position on a project, to really be seeing how they compare and to have that be inescapable when they walk to the water cooler. On the right-hand side, here are some sample details from Payette. where folks are encouraged to drop post-its and thoughts and questions and to push back or contribute new ideas to projects that are pursuing the 2030 commitment as well. And before we get into some of the more technical nitty-gritty about how you can go about tracking data and what that looks like in the DDX, the free online tool that we provide, I'd love to pause here for any additional questions. And Matt, please do jump in with any additional thoughts you may have.
Well, and maybe give you a chance to grab some more water. One of the questions that Richard dropped in the chat that I love, it's my favorite question to talk about with the 2030 commitment is, okay, so we understand how this fits into the climate conversation. We understand that other firms are deriving benefit, but as a small firm, how do I start to unlock that? And the sustainability action plan that Charlotte just touched on is so critical to that pathway. But small firms are such an interesting part of the 2030 commitment. They're the fastest growing segment of firms who are joining the 2030 commitment, and they're consistently the firms who are best positioned to hit the targets. And there's some really interesting strategies that are taking place. One is there can be some choosiness sometimes around projects, but it's also easier to go from being the firm that sort of just takes work to really being an advocate for your values and how you work with clients and how you get sought out and how you sort of can refer projects from one smaller firm in your area to another. That's something we hear a lot happening out of Southern California, for example. Folks will call up and they'll say, hey, I've got this project. And they'll say, you know what? We don't have space on our boards right now, or that's not really our area of expertise, but let me connect you with this other firm that's absolutely winning in that space. And that's a really exciting component, I think, of the 2030 commitment. Other areas are, we've seen firms who have really made at the small firm level an intentional point of engaging their entire staff. When you're talking about 3, 5, 10 employees, it's really easy to bring them together and say, all right, guys, this is our big goal. How are we going to get there together? And to bring them into that process and build ownership, it extends the life cycle in some ways of education. And it's a way that sets them up for success. Whereas a larger firm, you have churn on projects, you have churn on consultants, you have constant ebbing and flowing. And sometimes it can be hard to stay centered on that big picture goal. I'm going to drop 2 AIU course links in the chat that are, I think, really excellent at exploring those dynamics in small firms specifically. And I would encourage you to check those out at your leisure because they get into the story. And unlike what Charlotte and I can provide for you today, they're in the voice of the architect. They're actually the firms who are going through this work, talking about some of the mechanics of how they got there. So it's a great resource.
Thanks, Matt. And definitely encourage, but would absolutely second the suggestion to take a look at the Secrets to Success course there. We have them for small, medium, and big firms as well. So even if you're not a small firm, there is a Secrets to Success course on AIAU that's specifically about your firm size, demonstrating the experiences of some real leaders who are 2030 commitment signatories and how they found it beneficial. This is a really helpful way to take a moment. And as you think about whether joining the 2030 commitment is the right fit for you, to hear from your peers on how and why it might be useful. But they couldn't be better resources to rely on there. Does anyone else have any questions at present time? Thanks, Rick, for dropping that one in about small firms in particular. All right, well, hearing none, I'll jump into the next section here where we'll start to zoom in a little bit on the data and reporting process as part of the 2030 commitment, which is something that you, if joining the 2030 commitment, would start doing after the 12-month mark, most likely. In order to start submitting your data here and help the industry demonstrate its progress towards the 2030 commitment targets, as well as a way for you all to track your progress as a firm. Here on the right-hand side is a snapshot of what this looks like, of the DDX, the Design Data Exchange, which is a cloud-based confidential reporting tool where all data is anonymous, that we create and facilitate to enable 2030 commitment signatories to make sense of their data, collect all of their energy performance data in one place, is along with that embodied carbon piece and some other additional fields that might be helpful for you all in tracking your sustainability and performance data holistically. you very much can go on in here and create an account. It's something that you'll need to do if deciding to join the commitment, to upload that commitment letter. So encourage folks to do that as you think further about this. A couple important things that are helpful to keep in mind as you think about what the reporting process might look like. It can sound a little bit daunting at first, perhaps, about how to report and collect data across all of your projects on predicted energy use intensity, but it's really helpful to kind of keep as a refrain in your head that data is aggregated and anonymous. It's easy to pull together. We make it as simple as we can, and we're always eager to have feedback on how we can improve this process, but typically only takes about 30 minutes or so to gather and input data. Of course, as we talked about, making progress is more important than meeting the target. So don't feel anxious if the data that you're jotting down here doesn't show that today you're making, you're designing buildings that are 80% more efficient in energy use intensity than a conventional building for that use type. That's okay. And of course, really treating this as a framework to set energy targets early in the design process and tracking progress at each phase. So the DDX enables you to go in at schematic design, as well as at construction, at all stages of the design process and inputting data, especially if you're energy modeling. This is really helpful to be able to track in one place to see the progress and see how far you can drive energy use intensity down. One important question that a lot of folks ask, and that will be important to you all as you think through the how of how you might join and become a 2030 commitment signatory, is what projects you'll be reporting. Essentially, the answer is that anything with an HVAC system or with lighting uses energy, has a predicted energy use intensity, and we'd recommend reporting. It's really important to report your whole portfolio, not just the highest performing projects. For two important reasons. First and foremost, it's not as helpful to you. If you're just reporting the few projects you have that might be pursuing a certification to demonstrate its energy performance, or that have a really core sustainability mission into its into its scope, that's not giving you an accurate picture of how your portfolio across your firm is performing. So kind of cherry picking those elements doesn't give you that full macro level view onto how you're working towards these goals across the board. It also doesn't enable us to roll up the data and crunch the numbers on how the architecture industry as a whole is progressing. So when we looked at the data that demonstrated how the 50 billion square feet since 2005 that has been built, and how architects as a whole have driven the carbon emissions down 30% since that time for the building stock that's been designed. We want to be rolling up all of the energy performance data that we have available to be able to give a clearest, most accurate picture. We produce annually a report that we call By the Numbers that demonstrates the progress of 2030 commitment signatories. All of this is anonymous, of course, and aggregated, but it's really important for us to be having insight into the whole portfolio, into projects that are kicking butt and are carbon neutral today, as well as those that might be below code or meeting code, or having some reduction of predicted energy use intensity, but not quite achieving the target yet. We'll be mostly looking at whole building projects right now, but it's important to understand that interior only projects can also be reported as part of the 2030 commitment and DDX. The metric that you'll be tracking there is predicted lighting power density rather than predicted energy use intensity, but you can either look at both whole building as well as interior only, and it's a fit for both new construction as well as existing building renovations, kind of both sides of the coin there. One important facet of the DDX is that it's a place for everybody to connect. The admin point of contact for your firm, whether that might be you or a colleague should you join, will be able to add team members, and you'll be able to add those to specific projects. You can also add collaborators to a project. So if you're the associate firm or if you're the AOR, you can add collaborators who you're working with on the same project to view and add information for a particular building. They won't have insight into your whole portfolio, just that project that you add them to. And that can be a really helpful way to pull in, not only peers that you're designing with, but also consultants that might be doing modeling for you or contributing to a particular part of the building design process. And there are 3 ways that you can report data as part of the 2030 commitment through the DDX. You can input the data directly, which is great for small firms or for more manageably sized portfolios. For enormous portfolios, bulk uploading that data might be a more appropriate fit for you. And if you're using energy modeling software today, there are several energy modeling softwares that use an API to enable you to report directly into the DDX from that software, which a lot of folks choose to use to make that process as streamlined as possible. The DDX, as we talked about, is also a really great way for you to analyze and think about how you can improve your projects based on that predicted energy use intensity of your building. Back to this snapshot here of what projects look like. You can see some snapshots on the left-hand side. The bar charts here show you, you'll be able to zoom in, of course, and play around here as you add projects as a 2030 commitment signatory, but it'll show you how your project compares to the firm average, the amount of predicted energy use intensity reduction that your firm has been able to achieve across the board, as well as the industry writ large. We also provide box plots on projects as well, which is a little bit jargony and a little bit technical at first when you take a look at this, but is a really great tool to understand where you fall in the pack for your particular project that you're working in. So you can understand, whether you are, for every use type. One of the really exciting things about the 2030 commitments is that signatories are across the board achieving targets and beating targets. So you'll be able to see, where you fall in that spectrum, and even see that for some cases, folks are beating carbon neutrality and are feeding energy back into the grid, which is really exciting to see in some cases. And lastly here, an example of that, which I should have panned over to a moment ago. Just an example of where the target falls and how you can compare code to the target specifically. So when you're working towards that number, we'll automatically default to having that 80% 2030 target, 80% reduction in predicted energy use intensity, but you can also customize that. So should you have a more specific firm target that you're shooting towards, if your firm decides, we're going to put in 100% and be shooting for carbon neutrality as a whole, you can go ahead and do that, or alter it to whatever your specific firm target is. You can also alter that here on the climate zone dropdown and project use type dropdown to compare it to a more specific set of projects that are in the database already. Right there. And I'm going to pause here, having gone through a number of slides, and I know we're nearing the end of our time together. Now having the chance to pop open the DDX here and show some snapshots of what the platform looks like. Has this jogged any questions for folks about the parameters of what projects you might be required to report and what projects you might be reporting? If not, that's okay, and we can take a look at a few more. All right, we'll go on and talk about a few last exciting elements about the DDX that really empowers firms to make use and have great insight of their energy performance data, and being able to export the data that you have here into Excel, and to use all of the tools at your disposal to sift that and pour through and better understand the design parameters that you have here today, the predicted energy use intensity of the projects, or the lighting power density for your interior only projects. You'll be able to export it right along there, and take it out of the DDX. Some important things to keep in mind as we think about the energy performance of projects, and really driving towards carbon neutrality using predicted energy use intensity as our main metric here, is that, of course, energy performance isn't the only important part of high performing buildings and sustainability writ large. It certainly is beyond that. We know that climate change will not be impacting communities equally. We know that if only that communities of color and vulnerable populations will be bearing the brunt of climate change's impacts, and that equity is a really important consideration for us to keep in mind. Because of that, the Framework for Design Excellence is another really phenomenal resource from AIA that has launched, and is something that you're able to make use of to dive into that discusses energy in a meaningful way is one of the 10 principles it includes, but is not the only one by any means. This is a really great opportunity to zoom out and understand your projects more holistically, not only in the lens of the energy performance data that you would be contributing as a member of the 2030 commitment. And in addition to that, of course, lots of resources that can help you get there, including the AIA Plus 2030 course series, which is a really tactical, excellent tool for you to dive in and better understand how lighting, HVAC, building orientation, envelope, window to wall ratio, all play a role in energy use intensity and can all better enable you to reduce the predicted energy use intensity of your project. One of the really important common threads among 2030 commitment signatories who have been able to achieve targets and really drive predicted energy use intensity down across their portfolio is that they're able to get about halfway there through those really fundamental concepts about enclosure and window to wall ratio and envelope and some of those key mechanics that we talk about in depth here in AIA Plus 2030. And much like the courses that Matt talked about the secrets to success from small firms and big firms and medium firms, a lot of anecdotes are shared here in this course through architects as well, on how they've been able to achieve it, and a lot of touching on those cost components, both upfront, Kent, as you mentioned, as well as the operational cost savings that high performance energy buildings can achieve for their clients. And with that, we'll pause here and hope to have, I think a couple additional questions have been dropped into the chat, but very much want to underscore that at any time as you think through the process of becoming a 2030 commitment signatory, whether it will be helpful to answer any particular questions you have or more broadly talk about any of the concepts we've covered today, feel free to email us at 2030commitment@aia.org or set up a call with us here through this link. You can drop 20 or 30 minutes on any of our calendars on the 2030 commitment team. We also have a series of 4 open office hours that are coming up where if you choose to join the 2030 commitment, these are really great opportunities to get a better sense of what the reporting process looks like. The reporting period each year is between January and March 31st. So we're in the throes of a reporting season right now. And these are opportunities for signatories to sign on and ask questions about the projects they should be reporting and the data they're collecting and how to make use of the DDX. So if you would like to tune in and get a better sense of how that works as you join ahead of your first reporting cycle next spring, it's a really great opportunity to do so as well. But I'll stop here and thank everyone for their thoughts as well. And Matt would be thrilled for any additional thoughts that you have or anything you'd like to impart.
Well, I appreciate the overview. There's certainly a lot here. And what I really want to emphasize, and Charlotte touched on this, is that we hope you don't wait until you have it figured out within your own practice before you join. Joining is a great way to get connected to resources. You've seen that in the chat where I've been dropping resources and in some of the examples that we've shared. One question that came up that I want to touch on is related to Revit. Revit in particular, right? So building integrated modeling, we do have an API that connects the DDX, the Design Data Exchange, where you report project data to, I believe, 8 energy modeling tools. So that includes Insight 360. So that allows you to take your Revit model data and easily input it into DDX. It doesn't automatically send information from DDX, for example, back into Revit. So any design around the parameters or restrictions in terms of targets, you would have to do manually. But in terms of reporting, if that's already part of your workflow, it's a really great example of how participating in the 2030 commitment program, you can start being recognized for what you're already doing even before you take that next step. There's another question just touching on from Joseph. I work for an entity of the DOE. Is there any reporting opportunities? That's a great example of a question that would be great to get into more if you contact us at 2030 commitment at ai.org to really get into the details and the nuances. Very often we find that there's a path forward, right? If folks want to be part of it and be recognized and be contributing to moving the industry forward, we're inclined to work with you to find that pathway so you can feel seen. I don't believe that Graphisoft ArchiCAD is currently using our API. It is a public API though, so any software provider who's interested can access that and integrate it into their own development process. That's one thing I'd encourage you to share with their reps, but then also you can contact us for other tips and tricks. There are, again, 8, I believe, software tools, a range of price points and level of complexity. But even if you don't use that API connection, directly inputting that information is pretty easy. Less than 30 minutes to gather and input the information, and you can create and log a project data if you have that stuff handy in 3, 4, 5 minutes. There's one firm who very pridefully sent us an email and said, we're a competitive lot. And so we started timing it. And the mean time to enter and track down data was 7 minutes per project. And they're a larger company where they were going to have to sort through, different files and whatnot to find all the details to enter. So definitely an exciting piece. Thanks, Charlotte.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really great question, and definitely eager for other additional tools to begin using the API. It's a great way that's been able to streamline the process for many folks. And as Matt mentioned, it's certainly out there and folks are welcome to use it for if you happen to be using a software that's not listed here today. It's a conversation you can definitely facilitate. And in addition, in thinking through that, should you all be thinking about the 2030 commitment and want to facilitate a conversation with specifically your firm in particular to help us, facilitate Q&A for leadership or fellow staff that might be curious about the program but want to better understand the process and mechanics of reporting, or what have you, certainly welcome to do that. We speak with lots of particular firms, one firm, single firms, in addition to these broader conversations among chapters and regions on a more macro level. So please do reach out if that would feel appropriate or be useful to you all. But very much encourage anyone to drop us a line or shoot us an email at 2030commitment@aia.org with any questions that you have whatsoever. But appreciate all of the great questions that have been dropped into the chat or asked today. Are there any? I know we're a few minutes over and that you guys are towards the end of your afternoon over there on the West Coast. Are there any last questions anyone has right now? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, well, with that, I think we can pause here for the day, but really appreciate everyone's time and attention and enthusiasm and interest in thinking about how you all can better integrate energy performance into your portfolios and accelerate the profession's progress towards the 2030 targets as a whole. It's a really exciting dynamic community to be a part of, and as Matt mentioned, it's a really excellent community to be a part of to help figure out how to do it. You do not need to feel like you know how to do it today. So that's, I think, maybe a good note to part on, but appreciate you, Carlos, facilitating the conversation and for this really phenomenal group today jumping on here. And as Matt mentioned there in the chat, we'll be sending for anyone who added their AIA member number when they registered that one learning unit in the next 10 days. If you, for whatever reason, didn't include your AIA member number but have one, don't forget to email us to that as well. But thanks so much, everyone, for your time this evening, and have a great rest of your days.
Thank you both very much.
Thanks. Have a good night.